Once upon a time, there lived a very beautiful girl named Silver. Silver was the only child of Mr. and Mrs. Francis. Francis, her father, was a very wealthy businessman, a billionaire before he met his untimely death. Along with his wife on their way to a business conference. It was an unforgettable experience for those related to them. Their death left their only child shattered and depressed for months. Silver was 23 and in her final year when her parents died. Although her uncles took some of her parents' properties, Silver was also left with a fortune. Her parents left the kind of wealth that Silver didn't know how to manage. She knew that so many men coming to ask for her hand in marriage were all because of her wealth, not love. Some of these men were sent by her uncles and aunts who wanted to follow a cunning way to take everything she owned. Silver knew that she was only able to be in charge of some of her father's properties because of their good lawyer. Lawyer Kin was a very good man who stood by her until they recovered some of the things that her greedy uncles and aunts wanted to take. In her uncle's words, a mere woman didn't have a share in her father's properties. Many people said that they were right, but her father's lawyer made them understand that many things had changed. He recovered the ones he could and advised Silver to guide them with all her life. If she didn't want to beg for food, Silver knew that the only way she could lose everything depends on the kind of life partner she chose. If she ever made a mistake in choosing a life partner, that would be her downfall. After so much thought and consideration, she decided to live a different life in a different city where no one would recognize her. She handed some things over to her employees and relocated to another city. In this city, she dressed like a commoner. After 1 week of settlement in the city, Silver began her search for work. She moved from place to place. Finding a good job without a certificate was difficult, so she decided to take any job that would keep her busy. After all, she knew what she was looking for. One day, Silver moved into one big market dressed so casual, like one who was hungry. After a few hours of searching for work, she finally found a job. The owner of the shop was a 28-year-old man named David. David deals with anything called wine, both local and international ones. He was from a wealthy home. His father was also into the wine business, but David took over the business after graduating from the university. After a few questions, David told Silver to start work immediately. Silver was a very beautiful and hardworking girl. David was intrigued by the way Silver communicated with his customers. Some of the customers confessed that they had never seen someone that had that kind of customer relationship. David was amazed, and he began to engage Silver in some of the business conversations. He shared some business tactics with Silver. He asked for her advice in some of the decisions before embarking on it. Silver became a light in David's shop. David told his parents how good and hardworking Silver was, but due to the way he was grinning, his mother said to him, "I don't like the way you have been smiling. Remember, you cannot marry someone from no background. You must try to control your heart." David nodded his head. His father, Mr. Anthony, also told him that his mother was right, but it was already late. David had already fallen so deeply in love with Silver without knowing it. Each conversation with Silver was like igniting the fire of love in him. David didn't know how it happened, when it happened, but he saw himself craving Silver like the way children craved ice cream. One fateful afternoon, David was inside his office checking something in the laptop when Silver knocked on the door. "Who is that?" David questioned, his eyes still fixed on his laptop. "Sir, it is me, Silver," Silver replied. The moment David heard the name and the voice, he adjusted his clothes and sat firm with his 2 palms on the table. "Silver, come in," he said, grinning. Silver entered and stood in front of him. She started explaining the reason she had come to him. It was about a customer who returned a high-quality wine, saying that the wine was fake. As Silver was busy explaining things, David's eyes were roaming and scanning her whole body. They trailed from her head to her chest, stopped at her waist, and moved to her hip and back to her face. Her face looked extraordinarily smooth on that day. Her red lips seemed more inviting. David imagined his lips hugging hers, and then he stood up. She paused beside her, making Silver to look downcast. The next thing was David pressed his lips against hers. Silver struggled to loose from his grip, but David held her so tight on her face, suffocating her. After this, David asked Silver for forgiveness and also told her how much he had fallen in love with her. Silver scanned him for a few minutes. "You shouldn't have done this," she said, and slammed the office door behind her. David shook his head and sat down dejectedly on the couch inside his office. He knew that he had forked up. How could he have allowed his emotions to get the better part of him? He knew that Silver deserved better. At least he was supposed to woo her, to know if she was comfortable with it. What if she had another boyfriend? What if she didn't like him? Although he knew that many girls in the market were falling for him, Silver was different. He knew that, and that made him angrier. For 1 week, Silver didn't come to work. She stayed away from David and his shop. David continued to call her. He pleaded with her. He involved some of his friends to beg Silver. All his friends were also wealthy and influential men. This made some of the people living in the same compound with Silver sad. They asked who Silver thought she was. Some said that she would never see a man like David if she lost him. None of them knew who Silver was. They didn't know that Silver had already finished university, let alone knowing about her fortune. Silver's roommate advised her to accept David, so that he would lift her out of poverty. One evening, David came along with 2 of his friends to see Silver. After so much pleading, Silver decided to consider David. But before she did that, she told David that what he did to her was so bad, that it was like taking her for granted. She told him to always ask for consent before doing something of such. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. People in the shop began to notice the relationship between David and Silver. They knew that it wasn't only a relationship between a salesgirl and her boss. The way Silver talked to David made it so obvious. All the salesgirls were so envious of Silver. Some of the girls in the market were also angry. Many girls that wanted David were all from rich homes. They all had wealthy parents, but David didn't want them. As the rumor began to fly around the market, David decided to tell his parents about his relationship with Silver. He knew that his parents would be mad at him, but he was ready to risk it. He loved her, and he wanted her. That night, after having dinner, David, his 3 siblings, and his parents were inside the sitting room when David announced that he would love to discuss something with them. "Hope everything is all right with the business?" Mrs. Anthony asked curiously, and David nodded. They all sat firm, waiting for David to start. David cleared his throat. He knew what his mother's outburst would be, and he was also afraid of it. "Mom, I have found a girl that I would love to marry," David said and chuckled. "Is that what you were saying?" With a low voice. "This is the best news so far," Mrs. Anthony said and laughed. "You are our only son, and we can't wait to meet the girl," Mr. Anthony said and shook his hands. Davis's 3 sisters smiled sweetly, and one of them gave David a gentle pinch. "Who is the father of the girl? Do we know him?" "Who is the lucky girl?" Mrs. Anthony questioned with curious eyes. "Yes, Mom, you know her, but not the father. She is Silver, my salesgirl." "What?" Mrs. Anthony screamed and sprang up from her chair, her heart pounding in her chest, her lips and fingers trembling. "Did I not warn you against having anything with that poor rat? I warned you, David. I know that all these poor girls are after rich men." Mrs. Anthony barked, wagging her finger at David. "But I love her, Mom. I love Silver." David muttered, "Let that love catch fire. You won't marry a nobody. Over my dead body." She snapped her fingers around her head and turned to her husband. "Talk to your son. He won't marry that nobody." "What will happen to Lucy?" "I have told my friend that David will marry her daughter, and that is final. I have been taking good care of the girl because I want her to be my daughter-in-law." "David, you know that you can't marry anyhow. It is not possible. We have class, and you must marry someone in our class. Lucy is the best woman for you," Mr. Anthony explained. "Dad, I don't love Lucy. How do you people want me to say this?" "You will love her when you get married to her," Mr. Anthony said. That night, David laid on his bed wide awake. Sleep ran far away from his eyes. His sisters had promised to talk to their parents on his behalf, even though they knew that their mother's words were always final. David couldn't imagine himself getting married to that Lucy girl. He didn't even want to think about it. He knew that it would be hard, but he was ready to show his parents that Silver was a good person, that she was the kind of daughter that any parents would wish for. The next day, David left the house without taking his breakfast. It was a way to show his parents that he was angry with their decision. And once he came back from his office, he would go straight to his room. He no longer joined his family discussion. He was no longer the David they knew. One day, Mrs. Anthony threatened him that if he didn't come out of his room, that she would come to his shop to disgrace Silver. The last words clicked on David's head. He didn't want Silver to find out about his family's decision over their relationship. He had lied to Silver that his family loved her so much. The joy around Silver's face. The day he told her this made him not to tell her what his mother had said. He decided to fight the fight without involving the innocent girl. Still, he knew that if he acted weakly in front of his mother, that meant losing Silver forever. His mother was a formidable woman. Those types of women that set the rules for her family. No one was allowed to argue with them. "Mom, any day I see you in my office, I will leave the office for you," David said. His words echoed in his mother's head. None of her children had ever talked to her in that manner. "Am I the one you are talking to in that manner?" Mrs. Anthony asked, raising her hand to slap him. But David held his mother's hand. "Mom, I am no longer a child. I am a man, and you have to accept it. Allow me to make my own choice for once in life." "I don't want Lucy," David said and left angrily. Mrs. Anthony could neither believe her ears nor her eyes. She cleaned her ears with her middle finger, wiped her face with her palms. Everything seemed like a joke. Was David the one that had just flung her hand away? Was he the one that spoke with her rudely? All because of what? Because of a nobody? An ordinary salesgirl? A dirty girl who might not be up to her personal servants? Perhaps the girl had given David something to eat. She shook her head and sank on the couch. Hot tears streamed down her face. The whole scenario began to whirl like a whirlwind over her head. She had never imagined that a day like that would come. She had trained her children with carefulness. What exactly had come over David? She reasoned. She sat there dumbfounded for many hours without knowing what to do. But all she knew was that an ordinary salesgirl would never be her daughter-in-law. Never. Later in the night, she narrated what happened to her husband, Mr. Anthony. Mr. Anthony wasn't happy with David, but he told his wife that Silver might be a good girl like David had said. After long discussion, they decided to involve David in their discussion. David was inside his room feeling sorry for what he did to his mother. He didn't mean to hurt her feelings. All he wanted to do was something that would stop his mother from coming to his office. He was about to enter the bathroom to take his night bath when he heard the knock on his door. "Who is that?" he asked. "David, it is me, Cynthia. Mom is calling you," Cynthia said. David's heart skipped. How was he going to face his mother? It was true that what he did was wrong. But one thing he didn't want to do was to ask for forgiveness. He calmed his nerves, breathed out heavily and said, "Tell Mom that I will join her shortly." He told Cynthia. He didn't bother to take his bath again. The suspense was already much. He picked up his shorts and polo from his closet, put them on and went out of the room. His parents were inside the parlor waiting for him. He was surprised when he saw his mother smiling at him instead of being sad. David moved slowly and sank on the couch, not knowing what to say. He didn't know why they had summoned him, but he knew that his mother had reported him to his father. "David, my son," Mrs. Anthony began, smiling, "I know you will think that I am angry with you, but the truth is that I am not angry. You showed me that you are a real man and that you know what you want." "What?" David muttered with a surprised look. This was the first time his mother had spoken to him as if she was addressing a grown-up man. She didn't say those words with her commanding and authoritative voice. "You heard what I said, David. See, I don't want to beat around the bush. I have agreed that you will marry Silver." "Are you sure, Mom?" David questioned with great happiness. Mrs. Anthony let out a sly smile and locked her eyes at her husband. "Yes, I am serious, but only in one condition. Tell me whatever it is and I promise you that I will do it. I want Silver to come here and spend 6 months with us. I want to examine her. I want to train her so that she will be in our class. I want to make her a befitting daughter-in-law and wife." David hesitated before nodding his head. He knew that it wasn't going to be easy to convince Silver, but he was ready to try. Mr. Anthony nodded his head in agreement and said, "You are truly a lion, and you deserve a lioness as a wife. Your mother has your best interest at heart." He shook David's hand and clapped his shoulder. That night, David rehearsed the way he would present the topic to Silver without making her feel insulted. When it felt like all his ideas were bad, he began to put them down into a book. Silver, I want to marry you, but I want you to come and stay with us. No, he said and shook his head. Silver, can you come and spend 6 months with my family so that my mom will train you? That one is also bad. He canceled it again. Silver, my mom is demanding that you come and spend time with us so that you would be familiar with everyone in the family. Yes, yes, yes. This is perfect. This would make her happy, David told himself. But it didn't make Silver happy, it made her more sad. David made her understand how her decision was the only thing that would keep them together. He loved her, and he would sacrifice everything for her sake, without looking at her background. And all he wanted for her was that 6 months of sacrifice. He promised her that they would move out of the family house after their wedding. After a long thought, Silver decided to move in with David and his family. Are you Silver, the girl David had been talking about? Mrs. Anthony asked the moment Silver entered the sitting room. Silver wasn't unaware of her facial expressions, but she smiled and nodded her head. I wonder what he saw in you that is making him crazy, Mrs. Anthony murmured. Silver noticed from the movement of her mouth and her expression that whatever she had said wasn't pleasant. It was so obvious in the woman's face, but it was too early to complain. David came inside the sitting room with Silver's box and took Silver to his room. Silver wanted to ask him if he was sure that his family loved her. She wanted to ask many questions, but David didn't give her the chance. Silver had not even removed her clothes when they heard a knock on the door. It was David's younger sister. Mary, what is it? David questioned. Mum said that I should call Silver. Tell Mum that she is coming right away. David was so happy. He pinched Silver on her waist and said, Didn't I tell you that you will enjoy your stay here? I don't think there will be anything hard to do because we have 2 house helps. Silver nodded her head. Silver was surprised when David's mother asked her to make egusi soup and pounded yam on her first day in the house. She was alone in the kitchen throughout the whole time she was making the food. Was that part of welcome? Silver thought. David angrily went over to his mother. Why is Silver cooking in the kitchen instead of the maids? He asked. Mrs. Anthony smiled. I want to train her into a full woman. I am not punishing her. Or are you trying to say that your wife-to-be doesn't know how to cook food? No, Mum. But? There's no but, David. Soon you will thank me for training her, Mrs. Anthony said and patted on his shoulder. Without any other question, David went inside and relaxed. Silver was exhausted when she came out from the kitchen. She had never pounded yam in her life. She stylishly told David that it wasn't right, but David assured her that everything would soon be all right. Starting from that day, Silver was nothing less than a maid in the house. Each time she complained to David about his family attitude towards her, David would always advise her to bear whatever it was for their love. She woke up every day at cock crew to make different kinds of food. One day David got fed up with everything and went over to his mother in anger. As usual, his mother convinced him. She told him that the only reason why Silver was allowed to cook instead of the maids was because Silver cooked more than them. If she wasn't a good cook, she wouldn't have been allowed into the kitchen. David was happy hearing her mother praise Silver. He loved the fact that his family loved the way Silver cooked her food. Wasn't the way to a man's heart good food? It meant that Silver wasn't just beautiful, but also domesticated. He joyfully went into the room and shared the news with Silver. Silver stared at him. How myopic could someone be? She thought. She was beginning to see David with another eye. He wasn't the type of man she wanted. Everything about him was Mummy's boy. She had found out that his mother had his antidote. No matter how angry he was, his mother knew the best way to manipulate him. Silver knew that the family was trying to frustrate her life, yet she was ready to show them how resilient she was. There's no other word for what they did to her if not frustration. She made all the food, mopped the house, scrubbed the kitchen, and also joined them in evil production they did in the house. It was that time that Silver found out that half of what they sold in the shop was fake and stolen wines. That was what made them rich. Mr. Anthony had a small factory in his house where he produced assorted wines. Yet they would take them to market and sell them as original. People brought used quality wine cartons and bottles to them. They would buy them and use it to recreate another one. Silver couldn't believe what she saw on her first day inside the factory. About 10 workers were also there handling the mixture they called wine. When Mrs. Anthony found out how surprised she looked, the woman went over to her and said, "Whatever you see here will stay with you till death, if I hear it outside. I will make life miserable for you and your family." Silver nodded her head. Silver tried to tell David how bad what they were doing was, how harmful it was for human beings. David told her that many people inside the market were also doing the same. It was another way to make it big in the business. Silver had no option than to join them in their evil practice. As if the trouble with Mrs. Anthony wasn't enough, Silver had to also deal with David's sisters. Silver was inside the room with David when Cynthia came in with her clothes. "Silver, wash these clothes and iron them for me when they dry. I will go somewhere with it tomorrow," Cynthia said, handing the clothes over to Silver. Silver stared at the girl with her mother open, then fixed her at David. She waited for David to say something, to rebuke his little sister, but David didn't do it. All he said was, "Cynthia, you can go now, she will wash it later." Silver couldn't hold back her anger. She fixed a fierce look at David, a dangerous look that was capable of digging his heart out. "What did you just say?" Silver asked David when Cynthia left. "What did I say?" "I told her to go, and that you will do the washing later. Is there anything wrong with it?" David explained. "Can you even listen to yourself, David? Am I a maid in this house? I wash your parents' clothes. The other day it was Mary asking me to iron her clothes. And now Cynthia wants me, Silver, to wash her clothes. I think this is the height of it all. Yet you see nothing wrong with it." "Silver, I don't like the way you complain all the time. I hate ladies that nag too much. Washing my parents' clothes is more than the ones I have been doing for you. You complain and nag all the time." "I complain? How? Can't you even see that your family doesn't want me? That they are frustrating me?" "Silver, you are the one frustrating yourself with your bad attitude. I am beginning to see things from my mother's perspective. Why do you always complain about little things? Can't you just bear all these for the meantime? This is the 4th month, and in the next 2 months 2 of us will be out of here," David said with a harsh voice. "Is that why your family turned me into a maid? I am nothing but a maid for you, your father, your mother, and your siblings. The only person that treats me like a human in this house is the gate man. Only him." David chuckled. "Why won't gate man treat you like a human? What does he have to offer you? See, Silver, I am trying my best to take you out of poverty. You have the right to choose the life you want. I don't think there's any work here greater than the ones you used to do in your home." Silver couldn't believe what she had just heard. "And who told you that I am poor?" she muttered. "You aren't just poor. You are a church rat. I am only helping you. Behave yourself so that my family will not complain about anything. There are numerous girls out there praying to be my wife," David said and left the room. Silver stared with her eyes widened apart. Was that who David took her for? A church rat he was helping. The whole room began to spin around. How could David say such a thing to her? He wasn't like that before, Silver told herself. Right there, and then Silver knew that she wasn't going to marry David again. But she would stay behind to get more evidence against them. They had to pay for all the pain they cost her. One afternoon after cooking lunch, Silver was inside the room when she heard her name echoing from the sitting room. When she got there, she saw Mr. Anthony pointing at the center table. "Did you remove my cufflinks?" the man asked, and Silver shook her head sideways. "Look for it. I know you don't know how much they cost. And that was why you removed them from there. Don't you know that the price I got it could feed you and your whole family?" Mr. Anthony snarled, and Silver felt insulted. She could take any insult directed to her, but not to her late parents. She knew that if her father was alive, that Mr. Anthony would not have spoken to him in such a manner. "Sir, I didn't see your cufflinks. And please don't involve my family," Silver said, but before the last word came out of her mouth, she heard a thunderous slap on her cheek. "Who are you to speak to me in that manner? Who the hell is your wretched family that I will not talk to them like that?" The sound of Mr. Anthony's voice made all the family members gather inside the sitting room. David stood at the doorway staring at his father, watching him as he led more abusive words on Silver. If not because of my son, tell me where I would have come in contact with this pig. Fool, get out of my sight before I do something stupid." Silver slowly massaged her cheek and smiled. "I told you people that she is arrogant. I am a woman, and I know an arrogant woman when I see them. I have warned David against this girl. Can you see the way she is smiling?" Mrs. Anthony pointed at Silver, who was smiling and massaging her cheek. "There's no way she is going to be my daughter-in-law. Never." Mrs. Anthony, after speaking, fixed her gaze at David, as if she was communicating with him in spirit. Her blood was always hot, and right now it was like a glowing ember. David didn't ask Silver what happened. He didn't even bother to ask her what the problem was all about. He moved closer and demanded that Silver should kneel down and beg his father. "For what? I didn't do anything to him," Silver said angrily. "Can you see the way she is talking to a man who is supposed to be her husband? She lacks respect," Mrs. Anthony said and snapped her fingers. This made David more angry, and he wanted to show them that he could tame and subdue his wife as an African man. His wife would always obey his command. "Silver, kneel down and ask my dad for forgiveness." "Forgiveness for what? I didn't do anything to your dad. He is the one that slapped me." "Silver, the only thing I want you to do now is to ask my dad for forgiveness. Don't say another word." "But I didn't." Silver's words were cut short by another thunderous slaps on her both cheeks that blinded her eyes temporarily. David had applied all his weight and anger in that slap. As Silver was still wiping her face with her palms, David dragged her and threw her outside. "Do not come inside here if you are not ready to say sorry to my dad, foolish girl. Just imagine the pig I want to make my wife." Silver sprawled on the floor, staring at the man she wanted to take as her husband. She gnashed her teeth and shook her head. David went inside the sitting room, boiling like boiling water on top of a hearth. His mother moved closer to him, massaging his shoulder. "Calm down, David. You are a man. You did well. I have told you that Lucy is the best girl for you, but if you don't like her, I will find a good and obedient girl for you." Mrs. Anthony preached to David's ear. "Mom, can you imagine that? Did you see how rude she was? Silver wasn't like this at first. I don't know what has come over her," David said and shook his head. "I saw it. That is one thing with poor people. They are always ungrateful. They don't even know when someone is helping them. That is why it is best if you marry someone in your class. Someone who knows how hard it is to make money. Should I invite Lucy over to the house? You need someone right now by your side. You will love her. She is more beautiful than this thing you called silver ABI gold." David nodded his head and Mrs. Anthony smiled. That was what she had been looking for. A situation like that one to paint Silver black and bring Lucy inside. Silver went to the gateman post. It was the gateman that gave her something to rub on her swollen red eyes. "Madam, what happened? Who did this to you?" The gateman queried. "Mark, I have told you to stop calling me madam. I am not a madam." Silver smiled, trying to add humor. "By the way, I had a little problem with your David." "A little problem, and he did this to you? If anyone does something like this to my sister, I swear I will make sure to put the person where he belongs," the gateman said angrily. Silver chuckled in the midst of her painful eyes. "Mark, what if your sister is married? What if her husband did something like this to her?" Silver asked. Mark sprang up. With the tip of his finger, he took sand from the floor and touched it on the tip of his tongue and raised the finger towards the sky. "To God who made me, I swear with my mother's grave, if any man does something like this to my sister, I will make sure the person pays heavily for it. No man has the right to do something like this to any woman, be it a wife or a maid." Silver smiled. She was beginning to enjoy the conversation. That was the kind of man every woman wanted. A man who knew the value of his woman. Mark had always been there for her, even as a gateman. It wouldn't be bad if she settled down with him. Now that David was out of the picture. "Well, Mark, I think it is good for a man to beat his wife at times in order to reset her brain," Silver said with the most serious look. "Madam, spit it out. Clean your mouth, madam," Mark said and wiped his lips. "No man has the right to beat you or to reset your brain like you said. Is your brain a machine that he is resetting? You are my madam, but you should be the same age as my younger sister. So I will tell you what I told my sister. You are not a band, so your husband should not beat you. If he wants to beat something, let him look for a band, or perhaps drum." Silver didn't know when she let out a thunderous laughter. "Mark, please, my eyes are paining me. I don't want to laugh." As they were talking, they heard a car honking from the outside gate. Mark rushed immediately and set the gate ajar. He smiled at the person inside the car. Silver asked him who was in the car when he returned, and he said, "It was David's friend, a girl he thought that David would marry before." Silver brushed the topic aside and started with the one they were talking about. "Mark, so you hate men that beat their wife? Is that what you were saying?" "Yes, I hate them with passion. That was my father's advice to me before he died. He told me never to beat my wife because he had never done that. In truth, I never saw him raise his hand on my mother." "You talked about your mother's grave, and now you said that your father is late." "Yes, my mother's died 2 years ago, but my father died a long time ago." "Oh, so sorry for that. What of your siblings? Where are they?" "We are 4 in number. One is staying with my uncle, that's our last born. The other 2 are in the village. They are the reason why I have no saves." "Boys or girls?" "A boy and a girl. And you are the one taking care of them?" "Yes, do I have any option? To be the first son is not easy, especially when there's no money. Soon you will have money." "Amen, madam." In the midst of their conversation, Mark was thinking about the girl that came to the house. He wasn't sure, but his mind was whispering something to him. Why did the girl come to the house? It had been a long time since she stopped visiting. Mark remembered the last time she visited the house and how she left. It was David who pushed her out of the house. Abruptly, Mark turned to Silver. "Madam, please go inside now. It is getting late, and Oga David might be looking for you." "Mark, I don't want to go inside." "Madam, you have to go inside. You know you cannot sleep here. Please go inside and beg them." "Beg them for what? I didn't do anything." "I know, but just beg them. Do what Oga David asked you to do. It won't take anything for you. We are poor, so we have no option." "Mark, I am not poor, so I have options." Whatever that one meant didn't concern Mark. "Just go and beg them." Silver swallowed hard and nodded her head. She knew that Mark was right. There's no way. She would sleep in the gateman's house. But she wasn't also going to stay in the big house. She didn't care about getting more evidence against the family. Revealing the factory was a big piece of evidence. As she approached the open sitting room, she heard voices and laughter echoed from there. She paused and listened well. It was David's voice that was louder. As she walked into the sitting room, she saw David intertwined with another girl on the couch. David's parents were there laughing with them. Silver swept her eyes across and said, "David, why? Why this?" She touched her eyes. Mrs. Anthony let out a mocking laughter. "So you think that my son is going to marry a church rat like you? A nobody. You deserve everything you got," Mrs. Anthony said. "Silver, I can't be with a woman who is stubborn like you. I gave you an opportunity to come out of poverty, but you rejected it. This is Lucy, the woman I am going to marry," David said, tinkling the girl on his lap. "Yes-o. You can't give human food to pigs because they will never appreciate it." Mrs. Anthony chipped in. "Okay, no problem. We shall see who the rich one is," Silver murmured under her breath and began to walk inside the room. "Silver," David called, and Silver spun around. "You can become a maid here if you want. We will treat you well, and believe me, it will be better than going back to the slum where you came from," David said, and they all laughed out loud. His parents were happier. His siblings were neither sad nor happy. They were only staring at them. Silver nodded her head and disappeared into the room. Few minutes later, she came out with her luggages. Everyone in the sitting room seemed surprised. Perhaps they thought she would agree to be their maid. "Where are you going?" David asked. "To the slum," Silver replied firmly without hesitation. Good for you. You don't deserve anything good," Mrs. Anthony said. Silver didn't go back to her poor house. She went back to her main house where she had everything. Weeks later, she told herself that it was time to do the needful. She went over to some of the authorities in the country. She complained and wrote statements against what David and his family were producing in their house in the name of wine. Many people were interested in the case. Some said that they would use Mr. Anthony. and his family to set examples to those producing fake wines and drugs in the country. One early morning, David and his family were at the dining table when they heard the shrill sounds from the door. As the maid opened the door, they saw high-security personnel. Then they saw a beautiful lady walking behind them. It was Silver. "What are you doing here, you rat?" Mrs. Anthony snarled. "To make sure you all paid for all the rubbish you have been producing in the name of wine." Silver replied. "Who are you to do that? What gave you the gut to speak to me in such a manner?" She moved closer to slap Silver, but one the men held her hand. "Don't try it again," the man said. Silver chuckled and clapped her hands gently. "I'm Silver Francis, the only child of Francesco Motors." Silver smiled. "You are the daughter of Francisco Motors?" David asked. Silver acted like she didn't hear him. Mr. Anthony was by the side with some of the men trying to bribe them. He asked them to name the price, that he was ready to pay whatever they wanted. One of the officers shook his head and said, "It is no longer going to be like before. The person handling this case is in Abuja. I am sorry, Mr. Anthony, but this is beyond my control." "Officers, come, let me show you the factory," Silver said to the men in black. David stood dead, many things going through his mind. That was the girl he found, but his parents made him hate her. Mr. Anthony and David were arrested for producing fake and dangerous wine. Their wealth and affluence went to drain in the course of it. Meanwhile, Silver later got married to Mark, the gate man, and they both enjoyed their union to the fullest. Hello, champions. I hope you enjoyed the stories. Please leave a comment below and subscribe to my channel.